There is a pattern that separates every master trader from every struggling amateur. It's not strategy. It's not discipline. It's not risk management or technical analysis or years of screen time. It's passage through four distinct psychological states. States you cannot skip, cannot accelerate, cannot avoid. Every trader who achieves mastery crosses through all four, without exception. And every trader who stays stuck, who remains inconsistent despite years of effort, is trapped in one of the first two states. Not because they're incapable, because they don't know the states exist. This pattern was documented centuries ago, not by traders, by people studying the transformation of human consciousness itself. Medieval alchemists spent lifetimes observing a process they called the Great Work. They encoded it in cryptic symbols and obscure language, not to hide it, but because they lacked a vocabulary for what they were witnessing. What they were documenting wasn't chemistry, it was psychology. The systematic transformation of unconscious reactive human nature into conscious integrated mastery. And that same transformation, that exact pattern, is what trading forces on anyone who stays in the game long enough. In the 20th century, psychologists studying human development began noticing something remarkable. Across different cultures, different traditions, different contexts, people who underwent genuine transformation describe the same sequence of psychological states. 4 stages, always in the same order, always with the same characteristics: dissolution, purification, activation, integration. Not theory, not philosophy. Observed pattern across thousands of cases. And trading accelerates this process brutally, because trading strips away every defense mechanism, every pretense, every comfortable illusion about who you are. The market doesn't care about your self-image. It only cares about execution. And execution reveals your actual psychological state, not the one you present to others, not the one you tell yourself you're in, the one you actually occupy when pressure enters and nobody's watching. Most traders never learn this map exists. They struggle for years thinking the problem is their strategy, their discipline, their emotional control. But those aren't problems. Those are symptoms. Symptoms of being in a particular psychological state and not knowing how to progress to the next one. You can't solve a problem at the wrong level. You can't fix symptoms without addressing structure. And the structure of trading mastery is progression through these 4 states. If you've been trading for 2 years and you're still inconsistent, it's not because you haven't found the right strategy. It's because you're in dissolution or early purification, and you're trying to apply integration-level solutions to dissolution-level problems. If you understand what you should do, but can't do it consistently, you're not lacking discipline. You're in purification trying to force your way into activation without completing the necessary work. If you execute well sometimes but collapse under pressure, you haven't integrated the shadow aspects of your psychology. You're still in dissolution fragments. The map matters. Because once you see where you are, you stop applying the wrong solutions. You stop blaming yourself for being where you are. And you start doing the actual work your current state requires. This isn't motivational content. This isn't about trying harder or believing in yourself. This is structure, architecture, the pattern every master trader has walked. And by the end of this, you'll know exactly where you are on that path, what your current state demands, and what prevents you from progressing to the next one. Let's begin. Before we go deep into each state, you need to see the complete map, 4 states: sequential, universal. State 1, the dissolution. This is where everyone begins, and this is where most people quit. Dissolution is the systematic destruction of every illusion you have about yourself. You think you're rational, disciplined, capable of controlling your emotions. The market shows you, repeatedly, brutally, that you're none of those things. Every loss feels personal. Every mistake feels like evidence of inadequacy. Everyday trading feels like psychological warfare. You're not learning a skill. You're having your ego dismantled piece by piece. Psychologically, this is the encounter with the shadow. Everything you've rejected about yourself, cowardice, greed, weakness, impulsiveness, surfaces under pressure, and you can't ignore it. Because the market reflects it back at you through your P&L. Most traders never leave dissolution. They quit within the first year. Not because they can't learn strategies, because they can't endure watching themselves revealed. State 2, the purification. If you survive dissolution, if you endure the chaos long enough without quitting, you naturally enter purification. And purification feels like relief. The emotional intensity decreases. You start recognizing patterns in your behavior. Oh, I break rules when I'm afraid of being wrong. Oh, I exit early because I don't believe I deserve larger wins. You develop meta-awareness, the capacity to observe yourself, to see your patterns, to understand your triggers. This is the spectator state. You're watching yourself trade, analyzing, reflecting, understanding. And this is progress, real progress. But purification has a trap that catches 90% of traders who reach this state. The trap is you can spend years understanding yourself without ever transforming. You know why you break rules, but you still break them. You see your patterns clearly, but you can't change them. You're a spectator, observing, analyzing, but not yet participating fully. State 3. The activation is where spectators become participants. This is the shift from watching yourself trade to being the trade. In purification, there's a gap. You observe yourself executing. There's you and the action. In activation, that gap closes. You don't execute despite fear. You execute and fear is just present. No negotiation. No internal debate. This is where discipline stops being effort, because you're not forcing yourself to follow rules anymore. You've become someone for whom following rules is natural, not through willpower, through identity transformation. Mark Douglas observed this in every consistently profitable trader he studied. They didn't have better discipline. They had different identities. They weren't people trying to trade correctly. They were traders. And traders execute their systems. That's just what they do. Activation is rare. Most traders get stuck in purification because activation requires something terrifying. Full commitment without knowing if it will work. State 4, the integration. Integration is mastery. The trader in integration experiences zero internal conflict during execution, not because they've eliminated emotion, but because emotion no longer controls action. Fear is present, but it's information, not instruction. Losses happen, but they're probability, not evidence of inadequacy. Wins occur, but they're expected outcomes, not validation. The trader in integration has achieved what psychologists call psychological freedom. They're not driven by unconscious compulsions, not helplessly reactive to circumstances. They execute their system flawlessly under all conditions, not through discipline, through nature. Integration is rare, very rare. Most traders never reach it, but those who do are unmistakable. You can watch them trade and feel the difference. There's no internal struggle, no visible effort, just execution. Here's what you need to understand about these 4 states. They're not optional. Every master trader crossed through all 4. They're sequential. You can't skip dissolution and jump to activation. You can't avoid purification and go straight to integration. Each state prepares the next. Each state has specific work that must be completed before progression becomes possible. And most critically, knowing the map doesn't accelerate the journey, but it prevents you from getting lost. When you know you're in dissolution, you stop blaming your strategy and start facing yourself. When you know you're in purification, you stop analyzing endlessly and start committing to action. When you know you're in activation, you trust the process instead of questioning why it still requires effort. The map doesn't make the journey easier, but it makes it navigable. Now let's go deep into each state, what it feels like, what it demands, and how you know when you're ready to progress. The dissolution. The work begins in darkness. Dissolution is chaos, fragmentation, the systematic collapse of every structure you've used to organize your sense of self. And for most people, it's unbearable. When you first start trading, you don't know you're entering dissolution. You think you're learning a skill. You study strategies. You watch videos. You paper trade. You feel ready. Then you go live. And within weeks, sometimes days, everything falls apart. Not your strategy. You. Here's what dissolution looks like in trading. You blow your first account. Not because you're reckless, because you can't handle the emotional intensity of real money moving against you. You create rules. Then break them the moment discomfort enters. Stop loss gets moved. Targets get abandoned. Trades get skipped. You oscillate between states. After wins, you feel invincible. After losses, you feel worthless. Your self-worth is completely tied to your last trade. You search obsessively for new strategies, not because the old ones don't work, because you can't execute any strategy long enough to find out if it works. You experience what feels like psychological warfare. Every session drains you. Every loss haunts you. Every mistake feels like confirmation you're failing. This isn't learning curve difficulty. This is identity crisis. Because what's actually happening in dissolution is this. The market is showing you who you are when nobody's watching, when pressure enters, when discomfort is present, and you don't like what you see. You thought you were rational. The market shows you you're driven by fear and greed. You thought you were disciplined. The market shows you you'll abandon any rule when avoiding pain becomes more important than following process. You thought you could control your emotions. The market shows you your emotions control you completely. Every defense mechanism you've built, every story you've told yourself about who you are, gets systematically dismantled. This is the encounter with the shadow. The shadow is everything you've rejected about yourself. Everything you've repressed. Everything you project onto others because acknowledging it in yourself is too threatening. Cowardice, greed, impulsiveness, weakness, inadequacy, desperation. In normal life, you can avoid your shadow. You can maintain the social mask that presents you as competent and together. But trading destroys that mask within weeks. Because the screen becomes a mirror, and the mirror shows everything. Mark Douglas spent 15 years working with traders, and he observed this pattern in everyone who came to him. They didn't fail because they lacked intelligence or analytical ability. They failed because they couldn't face themselves. Trading revealed psychological patterns they'd spent their entire lives avoiding. And when forced to confront those patterns, they broke. Some quit, some stayed stuck. Very few did the actual work of integration. Dissolution manifests as depression, but not clinical depression requiring medication. This is existential depression, the collapse of meaning that comes from confronting the inadequacy of your previous mode of existence. You thought you understood yourself. Now you realize you don't. You thought you had control. Now you realize control was always illusion. You thought hard work and intelligence were enough. Now you realize something else is required, something you don't possess yet. This realization is crushing, because if the problem is you, not the strategy, not the market, not the broker, then there's nowhere to hide. The temptation in dissolution is escape. Find a guru who'll fix you. Switch to a different market. Convince yourself trading isn't for you. Anything to avoid the actual work, facing what the mirror shows. But dissolution doesn't allow escape, not if you're serious about mastery. The old structures must fully dissolve. The ego's illusions must be completely destroyed. The person you were must die, not literally, but psychologically. Because the person who entered trading cannot become a master trader. They lack the psychological capacity. A new self must be forged, and forging requires fire. Here's the brutal truth about dissolution. 80% of traders quit during this phase, within the first year. Not because trading is too hard technically, because dissolution is too painful psychologically. They can't endure watching themselves revealed. Can't face their own weakness, fear, and inadequacy day after day. So they quit. Or they tell themselves they're taking a break to learn more. Or they switch to paper trading indefinitely. All of it is just avoiding dissolution. But the 20% who persist, who endure the chaos without retreating, emerge transformed. Not because they learned better strategies, because they let the old self die. How do you know you're in dissolution? Every loss ruins your day. Your mood swings with your P and L. You can't separate your self-worth from your trading results. You blame everything: strategy, market, broker, luck, except yourself. Because admitting the problem feels like admitting you're fundamentally flawed. You search constantly for new approaches, not to improve, to reset, to avoid facing that you're the variable that needs changing. You feel like you're failing all the time. Even when you win, the feeling is temporary. One loss, and you're back in despair. How long does dissolution last? Minimum 6 months, often 12 to 18 months. Some traders stay here for years, cycling through chaos, never enduring it long enough to transform. How do you know you're leaving dissolution? When losses stop destroying you emotionally. When you start getting curious about your patterns instead of defensive about them. When you stop searching for new strategies and start examining why you can't execute the one you have. When the question shifts from what strategy works to why can't I execute consistently. That shift, from external blame to internal examination, is the threshold of purification. You don't graduate from dissolution by figuring it out intellectually. You graduate by enduring it until something fundamental shifts in how you relate to yourself. Until the person looking in the mirror isn't defending anymore. They're just observing. Until losing money stops feeling like evidence of inadequacy and starts feeling like feedback about behavior. until you stop needing the market to validate you and start needing yourself to execute correctly. That's the transition. And it only happens through sustained conscious endurance of the dissolution process. No shortcuts, no hacks, just time under fire until the old self burns away. The purification. Something shifts. The chaos doesn't disappear completely, but it loses its intensity. You're no longer drowning. You're treading water, observing the waves instead of being overwhelmed by them. This is purification, and it feels like progress. Purification is the spectator state. You develop what psychologists call meta-awareness, the capacity to observe yourself, to watch your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors as if from outside. You start recognizing patterns. I always move my stop when I'm afraid of being wrong right now. I exit winners early when I need proof I was right before the market reverses. I skip valid setups when I'm uncertain, even though uncertainty is part of probability. This recognition is powerful because for the first time, you're not identified with these patterns. You're watching them. There's you and there's the pattern, and you can see the difference. In dissolution, you were unconscious. You broke rules and didn't understand why. In purification, you're conscious. You break rules and you watch yourself doing it. This is massive progress. Don't underestimate it. Most traders never reach this level of self-awareness. They stay in unconscious reaction forever. But you've crossed into observation. You can see yourself clearly. Here's what purification looks like in trading. You stop blowing accounts. Not because you suddenly became disciplined, but because you recognize emotional triggers before they destroy you. Your P&L stabilizes, not profitable yet necessarily, but the wild swings decrease. You're not having massive winners and catastrophic losers. You're trading smaller, more consistently. You develop sophisticated understanding of your psychology. You journal not just about strategy performance, but about emotional states, triggers, thought patterns. You can identify when you're in survival mode versus execution mode. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, you can shift states before acting. You start separating your identity from outcomes. A loss doesn't mean you're inadequate. It means probability didn't favor you this time. This is the spectator state. You're watching yourself trade. There's a part of you executing, and there's a part of you observing that execution. That observer is developing, getting stronger, more detailed in its observations. And this observer is essential because you can't change what you can't see. Purification is also where you encounter your complementary functions. If you're highly analytical, someone who lives in logic, data, systematic thinking, purification forces you to develop intuition, feel, trust, non-rational knowing. If you're highly intuitive, someone who trades by feel, by reading energy, by gut instinct, purification forces you to develop structure, rules, systematic execution. Trading demands balance. You can't succeed being purely one-sided. The analytical trader who never trusts feel will miss opportunities that don't fit their rigid framework. The intuitive trader who resists structure will lack the consistency necessary for probability to play out. Purification is where this balance starts developing, not because you're trying to fix yourself, but because the market won't let you succeed without it. Now here's where most traders get stuck. Purification feels productive. You're learning about yourself, understanding your patterns, developing awareness. Progress is visible. You're not in chaos anymore. You're analyzing, refining, integrating insights. And this feels safe. Because in purification, you're a spectator. You're watching, not fully committing. There's still a gap between you and the action, between observer and executor. And that gap is comfortable, because if you fail, you can say, I'm still learning, still integrating, still working on myself. But here's the trap. You can stay in purification for years, decades even, endlessly analyzing, perpetually refining, constantly working on your psychology. You understand yourself deeply. You know every trigger, every pattern, every defense mechanism. But understanding doesn't change behavior. You know why you break rules, but you still break them. You see your patterns clearly, but you can't alter them under pressure. You have insight, but not transformation. Mark Douglas observed this repeatedly. Traders who could articulate their psychological patterns with stunning accuracy, who understood exactly what they were doing wrong and why, but they couldn't stop doing it, because knowing and being are different levels. Purification gives you knowing, but it doesn't give you being. And trading mastery isn't about knowing what to do, it's about being someone who does it. The spectator state has inherent limitations. When you're watching yourself, there's always distance, always separation, always a gap. That gap requires willpower to bridge. You see yourself wanting to move a stop. You observe the impulse. You use willpower to not act on it. That's purification level execution. And it works. Sometimes. But willpower is finite. It depletes. Under enough pressure, it fails. And when willpower fails, you revert to unconscious patterns. Back to dissolution fragments. Here's what happens to traders stuck in purification. They execute well in calm conditions, but collapse under volatility or stress. Because maintaining the observer position requires energy, and high-stress conditions overwhelm that capacity. They have good days and bad days. Good days are when willpower is strong. Bad days are when it's depleted. They can follow rules for weeks, then one emotionally charged session destroys all progress. They understand themselves better than 99% of traders, but they're not consistently profitable because they're still spectators, watching themselves trade instead of being the trade. The breakthrough moment, the threshold between purification and activation, comes when you realize more analysis won't help. More understanding won't change anything. More refinement won't close the gap. The gap will only close when you stop being a spectator and become a participant. When observer and executor merge. When there's no separation between knowing and doing. When you stop watching yourself follow rules and simply become someone for whom following rules is natural. That's not purification work. That's activation work. And activation requires something. Purification doesn't. Complete commitment without guarantee of success. How do you know you're stuck in purification? You can articulate your problems with stunning clarity, but nothing changes. You journal extensively. You understand your triggers. You recognize patterns as they happen. But recognition doesn't prevent repetition. You're frustrated. I know what to do. Why can't I just do it? That frustration is the signal. You've extracted all the value purification can offer. Now you need something else. Something that doesn't come from more observation. How long does purification last? For most traders, 1 to 3 years. But some stay here 5, 10, 15 years, perpetually analyzing, never fully committing, not because they're incapable, because committing feels dangerous. In purification, you're still safe, still working on it, still have the excuse of not ready yet. Activation removes that safety. Because in activation, you're no longer learning, you're executing. And if execution fails, there are no more excuses. That's why progression requires courage. not knowledge. Courage. The activation. The gap closes, not gradually, not through incremental improvement. One day, you're spectating. The next, you're participating. And you can feel the difference immediately. This is activation. Activation is the shift from watching yourself trade to being the trade. In purification, you observed, I'm feeling fear right now. I should execute anyway. In activation, there's no observation. Setup present. Execution happens. Fear is present, but irrelevant. Not because fear disappeared, because the gap between feeling and action closed. You don't overcome fear. You act with fear present, automatically. No negotiation required. This isn't better discipline. This is different identity. Discipline implies effort, willpower, forcing yourself to do what you don't want to do. Activation is effortless, not because it's easy, but because there's no internal resistance. You're not forcing yourself to follow rules. You're someone for whom following rules is natural. Mark Douglas documented this in every consistently profitable trader he studied. They didn't describe trying hard or being disciplined. They described execution as automatic, natural. Just what I do. When asked how they maintain discipline, they looked confused. I don't maintain anything. I just execute my system. That's activation. The state where behavior flows from identity rather than from willpower. Here's what activation looks like from the outside. You execute your system flawlessly under all conditions, volatile or calm, winning streak or losing streak, tired or fresh. Conditions don't affect execution quality because execution isn't conditional anymore. Other traders notice something's different about you. What changed? But you can't explain it because it's not a technique you learned. It's a state you entered. From the inside, activation feels like setup appears. You execute. No thought, no debate, no gap between recognition and action. You're trading, but there's no you separate from the trading. It's one motion. Losses occur. You note them. Move on. No emotional residue. No need to analyze what you did wrong. Just, probability didn't favor this instance. Wins occur. You note them. Move on. No emotional high. No feeling of validation. Just, expected outcome given edge and sample size. You're in the flow state, but it's not temporary. It's your baseline. The shift into activation often follows a crisis. You've been stuck in purification, analyzing endlessly, understanding deeply, but not changing. Then something breaks. A drawdown, a revelation, a moment of complete frustration where you think, fuck this. I'm done trying to figure it out. I'm just going to execute. And you do. Not perfectly, but completely. No holding back, no mental reservation, full commitment. And something shifts. Suddenly execution isn't hard anymore. The internal conflict dissolves. You're not fighting yourself. You've become what you were trying to do. This is what psychologists studying transformation have observed across contexts. The shift from trying to being happens when you stop attempting to become something and fully commit to acting as if you already are. Not fake it till you make it. But commit so fully that the distinction between acting and being disappears. In trading terms, you stop trying to trade like a professional. You commit to being a professional trader, and professionals execute their systems. That's what they do. The commitment precedes the identity. But once commitment is total, identity follows. Activation is also where you discover your authentic relationship with trading. In Dissolution, you were trying to prove something, escape something, achieve something external. In purification, you were trying to fix yourself, understand yourself, perfect yourself. In activation, none of that matters anymore. You trade because it's an expression of who you've become, not what you want, not what you're trying to achieve. It's aligned with your nature. The work fits you, and you fit the work. Mark Douglas called this the development of a professional trading identity. Not someone who trades, but someone for whom trading is a natural expression of their developed capacities. Here's what activation requires to enter. You must stop trying to control the process. Stop analyzing it. Stop perfecting it. You must commit completely to your system, to execution, to accepting outcomes without needing them to validate you. You must burn bridges back to purification. No more, I'm still learning. No more, I'm working on it. Just, I'm executing. That commitment is terrifying, because if you fail after full commitment, there are no excuses left. But that terror is the price of transformation. Most traders never enter activation, not because they can't, because they won't. They won't commit fully. They won't let go of the safety of still learning. They stay spectators forever, watching themselves trade, analyzing, refining, never fully participating. Because full participation means full accountability. And accountability without excuses feels too dangerous. But that danger is where mastery lives. How do you know you're in activation? Execution feels natural, not forced. You don't debate whether to take valid setups. Setup present equals execute. Internal conflict has decreased dramatically. You're not fighting yourself to follow rules. Other people's opinions about your trading don't affect you. You're not seeking validation or fearing criticism. Results don't swing your emotional state. Win or lose, you're stable. Because your self-worth is no longer tied to outcomes. You trust your system completely, not because it never loses, but because you know over sufficient sample size, it produces edge. And that's enough. How long does activation take to stabilize? Minimum 1 to 2 years after entering the state. The shift into activation can happen quickly. But stabilizing it, making it your baseline rather than something you drop out of under stress, takes time. This is the consolidation phase, where you test activation under various conditions, where it becomes permanent rather than temporary. Activation is not the final state, but it's the state where you become consistently profitable, because consistent profitability requires consistent execution. And consistent execution requires identity-level integration. You can't willpower your way to consistent profits, because willpower depletes. You need to become someone for whom execution is natural. And that's what activation provides. From here, you're profitable, stable, consistent, but there's still one more transformation available. The shift from participant to master, from activation to integration. The integration. Some traders stop at activation. They've achieved consistent profitability. Internal conflict is minimal. Execution is reliable, and they're satisfied. Why push further? But a small percentage continues. Not because they need to, because they're drawn to complete the work. This is integration, the fourth and final state. Integration is mastery. Not mastery as perfection, but mastery as complete psychological freedom. The trader in integration experiences zero internal conflict during execution, not low conflict. Zero. There's no part of them wanting to do anything other than execute the system. No resistance, no negotiation, no gap. Here's what integration looks like from inside. You're trading, but there's no sense of you doing the trading. Setup appears, body responds, execution happens. Like breathing, like walking. You're not directing it. You're not controlling it. It's just occurring through you. Emotions are present. Fear before entries. Anxiety during drawdowns. Excitement during winning streaks. But emotions are observed without being believed. They're weather. They pass through. They don't control action. Losses occur. You feel the loss. But it doesn't touch your center. It's surface level, like rain on a lake. The surface ripples. The depths remain still. Winds occur. Same experience. Pleasant, but not validating. The depths remain unchanged. This is what psychologists call psychological freedom. Not freedom from emotion or circumstance, but freedom from being controlled by them. You're not suppressing anything. You're not managing anything. There's just no internal compulsion anymore. Greed arises. You notice it. It doesn't control action. Fear arises. You notice it. It doesn't prevent execution. Hope arises. You notice it. It doesn't bias judgment. You're free. Not because you've escaped emotion, but because you've achieved sovereignty over your own actions. Mark Douglas spent his career trying to help traders reach this state. He called it thinking in probabilities, or the zone. But those terms don't capture the depth of the transformation. Integration isn't a technique. It's a completely different relationship with existence. You're no longer trying to control outcomes. Because you've internalized at the deepest level that outcomes are beyond control. You're no longer seeking validation from results. Because your sense of self is no longer dependent on performance. You're no longer avoiding discomfort. Because you've learned that discomfort is just sensation. And sensation doesn't require response. This is what ancient philosophical traditions called equanimity, what Stoics called apatheia, what Buddhists called upekkha, complete balance, unshakable center, presence without preference. Integration is rare, very rare. Psychologists who study human development estimate less than 5% of people achieve full psychological integration in any domain. In trading, even rarer. Because trading is brutal. It strips away defenses. It triggers every psychological vulnerability. Most people can't endure that long enough to reach integration. They quit. Or they stay stuck in earlier states. Or they achieve activation and stop there. But those who continue, who persist through years of work, who commit completely to transformation, eventually cross into integration. Here's what integration looks like in trading. You can trade for 8, 10, 12 hours straight without mental fatigue. Because there's no internal resistance to deplete you. You have no good days and bad days. Every day is just execution. Sometimes markets favor your edge, sometimes they don't. But your execution quality never wavers. Other traders feel the difference when they interact with you. There's a stability, a centeredness, but they can't articulate what it is. You've stopped seeking anything from trading. Not money, not validation, not proof of competence. You just execute your system because that's what you do. Results over 1,000 trades converge tightly around expected value because there's zero behavioral variance. Just probability playing out through flawless execution. What makes integration different from activation? In activation, you're a participant, fully committed, but effort is still present. Subtle effort, the effort of maintaining the state. In integration, even that effort dissolves. There's no maintenance required. The state is permanent. In activation, pressure can still push you toward earlier states temporarily. High stress, major life events, extended drawdowns, these can destabilize you briefly. In integration, nothing destabilizes you. External circumstances change. Internal state remains constant. Integration represents the union of opposites. Spectator and participant merge. You're simultaneously observing and acting with no separation. Emotion and action integrate. Feelings arise without dictating behavior. Control and surrender unite. You execute with precision while accepting you control nothing beyond execution itself. This isn't mystical. It's psychological maturation carried to completion. The fragmented psyche becomes whole. What was split integrates. What was in conflict harmonizes. And trading, because it demands this integration, becomes the vehicle for achieving it. How long does it take to reach integration? From the beginning of dissolution, minimum 5 to 7 years, often 10 plus. Some traders practice for decades and never arrive, not because they're incapable, because they never complete the work of earlier states. You can't skip to integration. You can't force it. You can only work through each state completely until integration emerges naturally. Integration is not required for profitability. Activation is enough for that. Integration is for those who see trading as more than income generation, who recognize it as a path of complete psychological development. For those traders, integration is the culmination, the completion of the work. After integration, you may continue trading for decades, or you may move on to other expressions. But the transformation remains. Because it's not about trading, it's about what you became through trading. The final truth about integration. Even here, you're not done. Development continues, but now it's conscious, deliberate, chosen. You're not being pushed through states by suffering. You're exploring new territories by choice. Crises still occur. New challenges arise, but you relate to them differently. They're not threats. They're opportunities, not problems to solve, experiences to integrate. You've completed the journey from unconscious reaction to conscious mastery. And that changes everything, not just in trading, in life. Because the person who achieves integration in trading has developed capacities that apply universally. Psychological freedom, equanimity under pressure, ability to act despite emotion, sovereignty over one's own behavior. These aren't trading skills. These are human capacities. And once developed, they can't be undeveloped. They're permanent. That's the real gold, not the profit, the transformation. So, where are you right now? Not where you want to be. Not where you think you should be. Where you actually are. If every loss ruins your day emotionally, if your self-worth swings with your P&L, if you're constantly searching for new strategies, you're in dissolution. If you understand your patterns deeply but can't change them, if you have exceptional self-awareness but inconsistent execution, you're in purification. If you execute consistently but it still requires conscious effort, if you're profitable but not yet effortless, you're in activation. If execution happens without internal conflict, if you trade for extended periods without fatigue, if nothing destabilizes your center, you're in integration. Most of you are in dissolution or early purification, and that's not a problem. That's where everyone begins. The problem only exists if you don't know where you are, because then you apply the wrong solutions. If you're in dissolution, trying to use activation level strategies, you'll fail, because you haven't completed the dissolution work. You haven't integrated your shadow, haven't faced yourself completely. haven't allowed the old identity to die? So you're trying to build mastery on a foundation that doesn't exist yet. If you're in purification trying to force your way into activation, through more analysis, you'll stay stuck. Because activation doesn't come from understanding. It comes from commitment. At some point, you have to stop analyzing and start being. And that requires courage, not knowledge. Here's what each state requires from you. Dissolution requires endurance. You must face yourself without retreating. You must endure the chaos without quitting. You must let the illusions die. Let the old self dissolve. Let the mirror show you everything. This is painful, humbling, often devastating, but it's necessary. You cannot build mastery on a false foundation. Purification requires observation without judgment. You must watch yourself with curiosity rather than criticism. You must separate identity from behavior. I did this is not the same as I am this. You must develop meta-awareness, the capacity to see patterns without being controlled by them. But you must also recognize when observation becomes avoidance, when analysis becomes excuse. Activation requires commitment without guarantee. You must fully commit to execution before you feel ready. You must act as if you're already what you're trying to become. You must burn bridges back to earlier states. No more, I'm still learning. Just, I'm executing. This is terrifying, because if you fail after total commitment, there are no excuses left. But that terror is the threshold, and crossing it is the price of mastery. Integration requires patience with the process. You cannot force integration. You can only continue practicing from activation until integration emerges naturally. You must trust that sustained conscious execution will eventually dissolve the last traces of resistance. You must accept that this may take years, and you must value the work itself, not just the destination. You cannot skip states. Every master trader crossed through all four, in order, without exception. Trying to skip dissolution by staying in your comfort zone keeps you stuck. Trying to skip purification by avoiding self-examination keeps you unconscious. Trying to skip activation by staying in analysis keeps you a spectator. The path is sequential, and each state has work that must be completed. This map doesn't make the journey easier, but it makes it navigable. When you know you're in dissolution, you stop blaming your strategy and start doing the dissolution work. When you know you're in purification, you stop analyzing endlessly and start moving toward commitment. When you know you're in activation, you trust the process instead of questioning why mastery still requires effort. And when you reach integration, you recognize it not as a rival, but as the beginning of conscious mastery. The question isn't whether you'll cross through these states. If you stay in trading long enough, you will. The question is, will you cross consciously or unconsciously? Will you understand where you are and what your current state requires? Or will you flail in confusion, applying the wrong solutions to misdiagnosed problems? This map is your guide. Use it. Locate yourself honestly. Do the work your state requires. Trust the process. And understand, every challenge you face, every frustration, every moment of struggle, it's all part of the transformation. Not obstacles to overcome, necessary stages in the forging of mastery. The medieval alchemists who documented this pattern centuries ago understood something modern culture has forgotten. True transformation requires death and rebirth, dissolution and reconstitution, the destruction of what you were and the emergence of what you're becoming. Trading forces this transformation on everyone who persists. The work is brutal. The path is long. The casualties are many. But those who complete the journey emerge fundamentally changed, not just as traders, as human beings. More conscious, more integrated, more free. That's the real prize, not the profit, the person you become in pursuit of it. And that person, once forged, can never be unforged. Now you know the map. Now you know where you are. The work begins where you are, not where you wish you were. Start there. Do that work. Trust the process. And understand, you're not alone on this path. Every master walked it before you. They survived. They transformed. They emerged. And so will you, if you persist.